in a pod, escaping the fire, the path that you trod. While Frieza's dark army hunted your kin, your parents sent you for a life to begin. In Capsule Corp, you found a new place, a boy with a tale from a warrior race. Dr. Brief called you Goku, a sun in the night, and Bulma protected your soul with her light. You grew up so strong, mid machines and the steel, watching Superman fly, wondering if he was real. Bulma questioned the light that you carried inside, while your own secret path had nowhere to hide. Now I see you soar in your orange and blue, Kakarot, the name that your people once knew, the last of the Saiyans with honor so rare. The girl from Krypton found to beyond compare, two souls from the stars, on this earth we would stand, to unite our two worlds and fight hand in hand. You travel the world, seeking strength in the fray, with Bulma beside you to lead the whole way. Then I finally appeared, Supergirl, Kal-El's kin. You were already a hero, with light on your skin. By Bulma's command, your mask was designed, a secret identity for the world to find. In our first encounter, a spark came to life, two aliens on Earth, in a world full of strife. I met the men Goku.
The cold starlight reflected off the hull of a Saiyan warship, a metallic sphere slicing through the silence of the void like an omen of destruction. Inside, the lighting was dim, washing over the austere metal walls and its two sole occupants. Bardock, a warrior of powerful build with a face etched by battles, watched the immensity of space through the main viewport. His black mane, standing up like a defiant mane, and the scars crossing his cheek told the story of a tireless fighter. His battle armor, a dull green and bearing the marks of countless encounters, creaked slightly with each of his movements. Beside him, his comrade Toma, of a less severe countenance but equally alert, broke the heavy silence. "Bardock, a doubt gnaws at me," Toma began, crossing his arms. "Why do you think Frieza specifically sent us to destroy this planet? I've heard rumors about the Kryptonians. They're said to be a peaceful race, more dedicated to science than war. Doesn't fit our modus operandi. We're usually sent to subdue inferior species, not to wipe technologically advanced civilizations off the map." Bardock didn't take his eyes off the star growing in the distance, their destination. He remained silent for a few seconds, processing the question with the tactical mind of a veteran. "It's not that mysterious," he replied, his voice rough and direct like the edge of a blade. "From what I know, Frieza made the Kryptonians an offer. Join his empire, not as warriors but as suppliers. Their technology is the most advanced he's ever encountered. With it, his conquest machine would be unstoppable." He paused and for the first time shifted his gaze toward Toma, with a glint of something that could be respect or simple pragmatism. "The Kryptonians refused. They laughed in his face. And Frieza doesn't like being told no. So instead of conquering it to sell off, the mission is to annihilate it. It's one of the few times the tyrant prefers total obliteration over profit." Toma let out a low whistle, not so much from surprise, but from the magnitude of the decision. Tough break for them. Their technology would have come in handy for us Saiyans. Faster ships, stronger armor. His eyes narrowed, pondering. But they're idiots too. Who stands up to Frieza? I'm surprised he even gave them a choice. Do you think it'll be tough? Killing them? A fierce smile, almost an animalistic gesture, crossed Bardock's face. "I don't know. This is the first time we'll face them directly. But there's an advantage." His gaze turned calculating, strategic. "This time we don't have to hold back to save the planet. We can have fun our own way. Plus, if we wait for nightfall, we can use the Ozaru transformation. It'll be a quick, decisive slaughter. A hunt under the light of an alien moon." The ship continued its unstoppable course, a bullet aimed at the heart of a doomed world, carrying within it the seed of a tragedy that, unknown to them, would define the destiny of two powerful races. The great red sun of Rao, the ancient beating heart of the Kryptonian system, filtered through the biocrystalline dome of the House of L's residence in Argo City. It wasn't the warm yellow light of a young sun, but a deep, wise crimson light that bathed the main chamber in a golden reddish hue, like the interior of a gigantic living jewel. This light, which had nourished their civilization for millennia, enveloped everything in an almost sacred peace, a stillness that spoke of an unshakable cosmic order. The room was more than a home. It was a testament to the pinnacle of Kryptonian genius. Curved surfaces of a pearly white metal, polished to a mirror finish, intertwined seamlessly with intelligent crystal panels. On these panels, instead of decorative art, slow and hypnotic dances of astrophysical data flowed. Schematics of complex molecules and stellar maps of familiar constellations that had guided their ancestors. The air itself was imbued with a symphony of subtle aromas. The faint, calming perfume of Krona, a blue herb growing in perfect spirals in pots of pure energy, mixed with the aroma of synthesized dinner delicacies, which released an aromatic vapor promising perfect nutrition. In the heart of this domestic sanctuary, the House of El partook in their evening ritual, a pillar of stability in their lives. Zor-El, the younger brother of the renowned Jor-El, was the very image of the Kryptonian scientist. His brow was high and clear, a canvas for a mind that calculated the forces sustaining Argo City. Yet his hands, which elegantly held his cup, were strong and steady, with pronounced knuckles and a few nearly imperceptible silvery scars, speaking of a man unafraid to descend from his ivory tower and get his hands dirty with the physical work required for his floating city's survival. His gaze, a serene blue like the crystal lakes of Wegther's moon, rested upon his daughter with a mixture of immense pride and a buried unease, a premonition that only his wife Alara could read in the slight tremor of his eyelid. Across from him, Alara Inze was the very embodiment of Kryptonian grace and strength. Her posture was as erect and perfect as that of a dancer in the ceremonies of Rao. Her long dress, snow-white with simple lines that flowed like water, fell around her body with an elegance that seemed to defy gravity. Her hair, a brilliant silver that was no sign of age but of genetic purity, was styled in an elaborate bun that accentuated the sculptural perfection of her features. Her eyes, the same deep blue as her husband's, reflected a sharp intelligence capable of unraveling the mysteries of biogenetic ethics, and a love for her family as unshakable as the laws of physics that governed their world. And then there was Kara. Kara Zor-El, 16 years old, was a whirlwind of blonde sunlight and contained energy that defied the room's serene aesthetic. Where her parents were composure, she was movement. Her blue eyes, bright with the insatiable curiosity of youth, seemed to want to absorb, catalogue, and question the entire universe. She moved her hands enthusiastically as she spoke, drawing shapes in the air, interrupting the solemn tranquility of the home not with rudeness, but with the contagious vibrancy of her very life. And finally, I really met him, Kara exclaimed, setting down her nutrient cup with a small, cheerful thump that made the dark amber liquid slosh inside. Cal. He's so small, mother. He fits perfectly in the crook of my arms, as if he was made to be there. He makes these sounds. They're not cries, they're like little warbles, like the crystal birds in the Garden of Memory. And his little hands. They're incredible. He grabbed a lock of my hair with a strength I didn't know he had and wouldn't let go. He was looking at me with those big, so serious eyes. A crystalline laugh, pure and unfiltered, escaped her lips, a sound that was the very antithesis of the coldness of the crystal surrounding them. Uncle Jor-El says his vital signs are exceptional, that he has the mark of Rao in his genetic code. He means it seriously. I bet he'll be incredibly strong when he grows up. Stronger than Papa, even. He'll be able to lift the boulders in the Kandar quarry with one hand. Zor-El couldn't help but let a wide, genuine smile, crinkling the corners of his eyes, illuminate his face. The scientist's seriousness, the burden of governing a city, all faded before the torrent of joy that was his daughter. Physical strength, little star, is just one tool among many, he said, his voice a deep, affectionate rumble. True strength, the kind that forges legacies and sustains civilizations, lies in character, in compassion, in the will to do what is right, even when the universe whispers that it's easier to give up. His voice became a degree more solemn, taking on the tone he used when explaining the principles of matter. And yes, it pleases me deeply, more than words can express, that you and Cal are forging a fraternal bond. You are the elder, Kara. That is not just an accident of birth. It is a sacred responsibility, a contract written not on paper, but in the blood of our house. He leaned forward slightly, his shadow projecting onto the table. I want you to protect him, to guide him when the paths grow dark. The universe, no matter how much we have mapped it, can be a complicated place full of shadows. You must be his lighthouse, the one who shows him the way when the fog of doubt besets him. In you, he will see not just a cousin, but the older sister fate did not give him. Alara leaned forward, and the liquid crystal of her seat emitted a soft, musical whisper as it adapted to her movement. Her hand, fine and pale, with long, delicate fingers that had manipulated genetic codes with an artist's precision, came to rest on her daughter's arm. Her touch was firm, reassuring. Your father is absolutely right, Kara, she affirmed, her voice melodious but with a tempered steel firmness. It is a bond that the Science Council, with all its scanners and prediction matrices, cannot quantify. Family is the backbone of our society, the most enduring legacy we can leave, more than any invention or discovery. It is the connective tissue that holds the cosmos together. Her eyes met Kara's, conveying a heritage of wisdom. With the closeness you will have, growing up almost as siblings between the halls of Argo and the libraries of Candor, you will forge a friendship, a trust, that neither time nor distance, nor the stars themselves can break. It is a gift, daughter. A rare and precious gift that you must treasure and nurture like the most delicate bio-garden. The three shared a look that transcended words, a perfect circuit of love and understanding flowing between them. In that moment, encapsulated in the bubble of red light, familial love, and the security of 1,000,000 years of history, the future stretched before Kara like a canvas of bright and infinite possibilities. The conversation then drifted towards the more mundane channels of their lives. Kara's progress in her dimensional physics studies and her frustration with Belson's field equations. Alara's latest controversial essay on the ethical limits of biogenetics and the Council's reaction. The new geological stabilization matrix Zor-El was working on, a colossal project designed to secure Argo City's core for the next 10,000 years. It was life full and precious. It was then, at the peak of that domestic peace, when the outer universe, cold and indifferent, decided to shatter their crystal bubble with the brutality of a hammer. The sound was unprecedented. It wasn't the controlled, expected thunder of a plasma reactor under test, nor the distant, familiar roar of a warp drive being calibrated. This sound was a gut-wrenching primal groan, as if the sky itself, the old and reliable Kryptonian sky, was being torn in two by gigantic claws. It was a metallic, alien shriek, the sound of a metal that did not obey their engineering principles, forcing its violent entry into the atmosphere with absolute contempt for elegance or efficiency. The entire house, a structure supposedly immune to minor tremors, vibrated in a visceral and ominous way. The fine Zen crystal tableware on the table, which had survived centuries, suddenly sang a sharp, desperate, unisonant chime of alarm, each piece vibrating on the edge of fracture. 3 pairs of Kryptonian eyes, genetically perfected to calculate subatomic trajectories and fundamental forces, rose in unison toward the transparent dome. What they saw froze the blood in their veins, nullifying for an instant all their logic and science. Against the familiar crimson disk of Rao, grotesquely spherical black silhouettes crossed the sky. There were 4, maybe 5 brutalist, unadorned metal balls that seemed forged not in foundries, but in the heart of a volcano of hatred. They lacked the sleek, flowing aerodynamic elegance of Kryptonian ships, which blended with space. These had the menacing crudeness of a projectile, of a battering ram. They left trails of dark, oily smoke, and the air behind them distorted with the residual heat of their friction, like ugly, inflamed scars on the hitherto flawless firmament. What is that? Kara managed to articulate her voice for the first time that night, a weak thread, an echo of her usual vigor. The scientific curiosity in her eyes was beginning to be displaced, swept away by a primal chill of apprehension running down her spine. They look like ships, but their design doesn't match any central archive record. They're not from here. Their design is... it's aggressive. They look made only to strike. Zor-El and Alara rose in one single, fluid motion, a perfectly synchronized choreography of alarm. The transformation on the scientist's face was instantaneous and terrifying. A deathly pallor suddenly replaced the healthy tone of his skin, and his eyes, now wide open, reflected a horror Kara had never seen in them before. A horror not from a failed experiment, but from an immediate recognition of the end. His fist, clenched with a force that made the tendons in his hand creak, struck the crystal surface of the table with a dry, blunt, and violent thump that did not belong in that place. The sound was like a bone breaking, and it made the utensils jump, spilling the nutritious amber liquid like blood onto the pristine whiteness of the table. Zor-El. The name left Alara's lips like a frightened whisper, her hand instinctively seeking her husband's arm, her fingers gripping it tightly. Her gaze wasn't on the ships, but on the data panels on the wall, where warning symbols now flashed in a frenzy. Those energy signatures, the thermoionic impulse configuration. Aren't they identical? An exact match to the ones we recorded on Frieza's emissary ship a cycle ago? Yes. Zor-El's response was a harsh rasp, the voice of a man watching all his worst predictions come true before his eyes. His mind, even now, couldn't help but function, calculating impact angles, the energy output of those monstrous ships, and the lethal intent emanating from them. They're his attack dogs, the Saiyans. He spoke the name not with fear, but with profound contempt, as if spitting poison. But I don't understand why. Logic is crumbling. The council rejected their ultimatum. We had agreed there was nothing here for them. We are not warriors. We refuse to be their engineers or their soldiers. What are they after, then? Revenge for our refusal. A lesson for the rest of the galaxy. Before Zor-El's mind could elaborate further on his theory, find a crack of hope in the logic of disaster, a guttural siren, a sound not heard on the pristine streets of Argo City since its founding millennia ago, began to wail from the city's ubiquitous sound panels. It wasn't a test alarm. It was a pulse of pure ancestral terror, a discordant and frantic rhythm designed specifically to freeze blood in veins, to paralyze the rational mind and awaken the most basic animal instinct: survival at any cost. Simultaneously, the words "immediate evacuation" flashed in a bleeding, pulsating red, like an open wound, on every intelligent crystal in the house, replacing the serene data flows. The scientist in Zor-El was overridden, crushed by the father. To the Gamma Sector containment shelter. It's the closest. Now. His voice was no longer that of a man debating, but of a commander on a disintegrating battlefield. Allowed no discussion, no room for questions. With a movement that was both abrupt and protective, he grabbed Kara's arm with a firmness that to her, accustomed to the gentle touches of her world, was shocking and painful. They stepped outside, and the orderly, logical, predictable world of Krypton had disintegrated in seconds. The air, moments ago filled with the calming scent of Krona, now smelled of burnt ozone, pulverized crystal, the superheated oils of alien engines, and a bitter metallic dust that stuck in their throats. The siren's wail was deafening, a physical wall of sound pushing people, breaking their mental balance and hurling them towards collective madness. Citizens, always so serene, composed and self-possessed, now ran in all directions like insects in a trampled anthill. Their screams, choked with panic, no longer formed coherent words, but visceral sounds. The pillars. The city pillars are falling. They've come for us. Frieza didn't forgive. My son. Where is my son? And then, in the midst of that growing chaos, her gaze was irresistibly drawn to the epicenter of the horror. Less than half a kilometer from their home, in the majestic Unification Plaza where Krypton's great minds gathered to debate the future, one of the black spheres had impacted with the force of an enraged god. The crater it had opened wasn't a hole. It was an open, smoking, deep wound in the very heart of Argo City, from which orange flames and hissing steam erupted. Debris of intelligent crystal, now opaque and dead, and metal twisted into impossible shapes, rained down on the plaza like a deadly storm of confetti. And there, in the midst of the spreading smoke and destruction, the ship lay, motionless and ominous, like a metallic egg from some nightmare bird freshly laid in the nest of their civilization. With an ominous hydraulic hiss, a sound promising nothing good, a circular hatch on the hull opened inward, revealing a profound darkness. From the darkness within, two figures emerged. They were not Kryptonian. They were something out of their darkest legends. From the historical records of barbaric races their civilization had surpassed eons ago. The first to step onto the pulverized crystal of their world was a woman. Her body was a masterpiece of aggressive musculature, every fiber defined not for aesthetics, but for pure combat efficiency, for generating maximum destruction. She wore dark purple armor, rather scant and composed mainly of a breastplate, shoulder guards and greaves, which seemed designed not for protection, but for absolute mobility and psychological intimidation. It left exposed her washboard abs, her powerful arms crossed with white scars that told stories of 1,000 battles, and her thighs thick as tree trunks. Her hair, jet black and short, framed a face with sharp features, a straight nose and a merciless smile, almost one of ecstasy, that didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes were the most terrifying thing. Cold, empty, like black wells absorbing light and hope. A black, thick, and muscular tail slowly coiled and uncoiled around her waist with a hypnotic, predatory movement, like a restless snake sizing up its prey. Behind her, with heavy steps that made the debris crunch, emerged a man. He was shorter than her, but his corpulence was enormous, crushing. It wasn't Kryptonian athletic slenderness, but a broad, obese yet incredibly dense build, like a sumo wrestler carved from living granite. His armor was a dull military green, and his hair, also black and short, barely covered his wide skull. His face was a mask of indifferent boredom, his lower lip slightly drooping, as if he were performing a mundane task like taking out the trash. His tail, thicker and shorter, moved with irritated laziness. He didn't show the sadistic joy of his companion, but the attitude of a bored worker on a death assembly line. It was then that a scream, laden with an ancestral terror resonating in their species' DNA, rose from the fleeing crowd, a chorus of voices shattered by instant realization. Saiyans! They're the Saiyan warriors. Frieza has sent them to exterminate us. Kara, still held firmly by her father's arm, watched the scene with wide, staring eyes, her mind struggling to process the scale of the violence and the appearance of these creatures. Saiyans! The word echoed in her mind, finding its place in her memory archives. The mercenaries, the conquerors without honor, the galactic tyrant's favorite tool. The accounts always painted them as brutes, but seeing them in person, they were real. They were real, and they were here in her home, and they had come with a purpose written on their merciless smiles. There was no warning, no demand for surrender, no diplomacy. The Saiyan woman, with a terrifying nonchalance that was more insulting than any war cry, raised her gloved hand with an almost theatrical slowness. An aura of electric pink and violet energy, a color that didn't exist in Krypton's natural light spectrum, crackled around her fist with a static hum audible even over the sirens. With a gesture that was almost a yawn, a casual flick of her wrist, she launched a thin, precise, and deadly ki blast. It wasn't aimed at the fleeing people, but at the structural base of an imposing neighboring apartment tower, a building standing as a testament to their architecture, home to hundreds of families whose lives, in that instant, were reduced to a variable in an equation of power. The flash was absolutely blinding, a second sun igniting in the heart of the city, bleaching Rao's red light for an eternal microsecond. The sound that followed wasn't that of just any explosion. It was the sound of a world ending, of 1,000 physical laws being violated at once, a roar that was both a shriek and a thunderclap. The tower, that magnificent structure that had housed dreams, loves, and lives, simply disintegrated at its base. For one surreal second, the top of the tower remained suspended in the air, an impossible and grotesque silhouette against the red sun, a monument to the fragility of everything they knew, before collapsing upon itself in a cataclysmic, slow, and terrible avalanche of ravenous fire, pulverized crystal, and molten metal that splattered like lava. The heat from the explosion reached them even hundreds of meters away, a dry, scorching, and deadly blast hitting their faces and drying their eyes, laden with the dust of those who had been their neighbors. Controlled panic turned into total, animalistic, directionless hysteria. Zol, his heart squeezed by an anguish not just for his own life or his family's, but for the entire future of his world crumbling before his eyes. For the legacy of the House of El hanging by a thread, squeezed Kara's hand with a desperate, almost fierce strength. To your Uncle Jor-El's house in Kandor. It's our only chance, our only safe point. He shouted over the deafening roar, and without waiting for a response, he began to run, dragging his daughter and taking his wife by the arm, moving away from the epicenter of destruction, dodging debris and crazed citizens, towards a hope that grew fainter, more distant, with each new explosion shaking the foundations of Argo City. The hunt, just as Bardock had coldly planned it on his ship, had begun. And Krypton, in all its scientific and cultural splendor, was utterly unprepared for the pure, unfiltered bestiality that had been unleashed upon it. The world had shrunk to a nightmare corridor. The air, once perfumed by the luminous spores of community gardens, was now a thick soup of metallic smoke and burnt ozone. Zurl, his arm protecting Kara against his side, advanced like a cornered bull, dodging the pinkish flashes of Saiyan energy raining from the sky like a deadly downpour. Each impact was a lash to the ears, a shudder in the ground that made them stagger. In the distance, the chorus of Oozuru roars was a continuous, terrifying bass note, a primitive sound that did not belong to their civilized world. They were echoes of a bestiality they believed extinct, now unleashed in the heart of their city. Finally, the familiar silhouette of Jor-El's residence rose before them. The armored door, carved with the family tree of the House of El, recognized their genetic signature and opened with an urgent hiss, closing behind them with a dull, definitive thud that, for a brief instant, muffled the external uproar. The contrast was brutal. Inside, Kryptonian order reigned. The low hum of life support systems, the clean, recycled air, the soft light of liquid crystal lamps. But peace had been replaced by an electric tension, charged with desperation. Jor-El stood before the room's main central console, his back straight, but his shoulders bearing the weight of a world. The holograms floating before him showed a blue and green planet, spinning with an innocence that tore at their souls. Beside him, Lara, her face pale as marble from the northern quarries, gently rocked a small bundle wrapped in a Kryptonian silk blanket, immaculate white with a scarlet emblem of the House of El embroidered on the chest. It was Kellel. His tiny fists, free from the blanket, waved in the air, and his large blue eyes looked with curiosity at the dancing lights, completely unaware of the cataclysm unfolding beyond the insulated walls. Jor-El. Zor-El's voice was a hoarse gasp, a sound forced through burning lungs. He braced himself with one hand on the doorframe, knuckles white. Do you see it? Do you see their pattern? This isn't a conquest. It's a lesson. An annihilation. Frieza doesn't want our resources or our brains. He wants our memory. He wants to erase the last mention of Krypton from the galactic annals for daring to say no to him. Before his brother could articulate a response, a new roar erupted, so close this time that the main window crystals vibrated with a sharp, threatening tinkle. All of them, as if pulled by the same string, turned towards the large glass bay offering a panoramic view of Kandor. What they saw froze their blood. An Oozuru, a mountain of muscle and furry fury, with eyes blazing an infernal red, had just ripped a communications tower from its base and was hurling it at a housing complex like a spear. Beside it, another of the colossi opened its maw and vomited a torrent of pure energy that carved a smoking canyon into the government district, a brutal gash in the face of their civilization. The Kryptonian moon, whether natural or a Saiyan device, hung in the sky like a blind, malevolent eye, witnessing the bestial transformation of their attackers. By the skies of Rao. Alara's voice was a broken whisper. She brought both hands to her mouth, her eyes, so like her daughter's, flooded with a horror that was not just for the death, but for the desecration of everything her people had built. Jor-El did not flinch. Or rather, all his shock, all his pain, compacted into a diamond-hard determination. He turned to his brother, and in his eyes burned the cold fire of an inevitable conclusion. "The time for analysis is over, brother," he declared, his voice a lash clear and cutting. "Only the Exodus plan remains. The preservation of the seed. The children must leave. It is our only possible victory against the darkness." Zor-El nodded, a sharp, abrupt movement of his head. His mind, trained to find solutions in the midst of chaos, had already reached the same heartbreaking equation. "The ships?" he asked, though the question was a formality, a final nail to cling to. "The warp jump prototypes," Jor-El confirmed, gesturing with a nod towards the ramp descending to his private laboratories. "Only two. Their design is experimental, their range theoretical. They were intended to map the Magellanic Cloud. Now they will be their capsules, their ark in an ocean of darkness. The destination, Jor-El?" Zor-El's voice was laden with an urgency bordering on hysteria. "It cannot be a world within the tyrant's sphere of influence. It must be a forgotten place, a grain of sand on the cosmic beach. A place where two children under a yellow sun could go unnoticed, where they could live." Jor-El extended a hand towards the hologram of the blue planet, and the image expanded, showing continents, oceans, white clouds. "I have spent years studying candidates. Only one meets all the parameters. A world in the Orion Arm, catalog designation T-3S-5-2. Its inhabitants call it Earth." He spoke the name with a mixture of hope and profound sadness. "Their technology is archaic. Fossil combustion, low-frequency radio transmissions. Their society is fragmented into tribes called nations, mired in trivial conflicts. But its sun is young, yellow, and its atmosphere is rich in nitrogen and oxygen. It will be a paradise for them. And most crucially, it is a third-rate world of no strategic value. Frieza won't even log its name in his databases. There they will be safe. There, our lineage will endure." There was no further discussion. Words were luxuries the ticking clock of the apocalypse did not allow. While the roar of street battle became a constant hammering against the outer walls, the two brothers and their wives transformed into a four-part team moving with the synchronization of a funereal, perfect dance. In the left launch chamber, illuminated by amber standby lights, Lara knelt before the small capsule. Her tears, now, fell freely and silently onto the cold metal deck. With infinite tenderness, transcending the terror surrounding them, she placed Kal-El inside the padded interior. She tucked him in with the blanket, making sure the house emblem was visible on his small chest. She gave him a soft kiss, a stamp of love imprinted for eternity on his forehead. "Grow strong, my little son," she whispered, her voice a thread of sound laden with heartbreaking love. "Carry our legacy in your blood. Carry our love in your heart." Beside the baby, she placed the memory crystal, the complete archive of Krypton, its science, its art, its history. An entire world, reduced to the latent light within a gem. In the adjacent chamber, the scene was an equally painful echo. Kara, in the flight suit that had been hastily prepared, was already seated in her ship, larger than her cousins, designed for a conscious traveler. Her eyes, so young and now so old, looked at her parents with a storm of emotions. The confusion of adolescence, the visceral fear of the unknown, and a sadness so deep it seemed to want to devour her from within. Zor-El knelt before the hatch, his daily armor scratched and stained with soot. He took his daughter's hand in his. He was no longer the scientist nor the leader. He was just a father. "Kara, Kara, my little star," he began, and his voice, for the first time in his life, audibly broke. A stifled sob shook his body. "Listen to me. This is not a goodbye. It's a mission. The most important that has ever existed." He squeezed her hand with a strength that spoke of his desperation. Please be very, very careful. Out there in the vastness. He made a vague gesture with his head towards the ceiling, towards the infinite space awaiting her. And your cousin. Oh, I entrust him to you. He is your blood. He is your responsibility. His gaze became intense, pleading, his eyes bloodshot. We need you to take care of each other. For your bond to be your strength. He paused, swallowing hard. Please, Kara, I beg you, follow a good path. Path of light. Don't let the hatred for what happened today poison your hearts. Do not seek revenge. Do not speak his name. Frieza is a plague, an evil you cannot escape. Do not try to do anything to avenge us. Do not carry that weight. A tear, thick and heavy, finally escaped his eye and traced a path down the scar on his cheek, drawing a wet line in the dust. This is the last thing. The last thing I will ever ask of you. His voice reduced to a hoarse whisper. Please, my daughter, make your cousin a good man, a man of honor. And you. Be the wonderful, strong and compassionate woman we always knew you would be. Be our little star, shining with your own light in a new and strange sky. We love you. We love you more than the stars love the night, more than the universe loves space. We love you. Akira could no longer contain herself. She lunged towards the hatch, thrusting half her body into the ship to envelop her daughter in a hug. It wasn't a polite goodbye, it was a struggle, a desperate attempt to imprint on her skin, her scent, her very being, the memory of their love. My girl, my strong, beautiful girl, she murmured between sobs against her hair. Be brave. Remember who you are. Remember where you come from. Carry us with you. Always. Kara, drowning in her own pain, could only nod, holding her mother with all her might, knowing it was the last time. With their hearts shattered into pieces and the sound of the Uozaru tearing down the house's outer defenses as a nightmare soundtrack, Zor-El, tears streaming freely down his face, placed his hands on the hatch and sealed it. The hydraulic mechanism hissed, separating daughter from father forever. From inside, Kara, her face bathed in tears, saw her parents. She saw them standing there, embracing, her mother's hands clinging to her father's arm. She saw them, not as the powerful beings she had always known, but as two tiny, fragile figures, bathed in the red light of the alerts. Their faces, marked by pain and love, blurred, grew small, and then were replaced by a blinding flash of white light that filled the ship's viewport. A monumental thrust, a force that crushed her against her seat, tore her from her dying world. The two ships, like silver tears in the blackness, launched themselves into the interstellar void, carrying with them the last breath of Krypton, the legacy of the House of El, and the weight of a heartbreaking promise, heading for a legendary world called Earth. Kal-El's cry was no longer the soft whimper from before. It was a sharp, heart-wrenching sound, a primal lament surging from the depths of his tiny being, as if his innocent Kryptonian essence could perceive the magnitude of the tragedy unfolding around him. Each wail was a knife twisting in the hearts of Lara and Jor-El. On the other side of the crystal, in her own capsule, Kara could no longer contain the torrent of emotions. The tears, which until then she had tried to hold back with adolescent pride, finally flowed, hot and silent, tracing paths down her cheeks. She wasn't looking towards the future, towards the darkness of space awaiting her. Her gaze was fixed on the faces of her parents, Zor-El and Akira, who remained standing, embraced like a statue of farewell. She saw them, and her aunt and uncle beside Kal's capsule, in an image she wanted to burn into her memory for all eternity. They were the last vestiges of her world, her life, everything she had known and loved. It was in that moment of heartbreaking farewell that the universe exploded. A colossal roar, 1,000 times more powerful than any thunderclap, shook the foundations of Jor-El's complex. It wasn't a distant, external sound. It was a direct impact, a battering ram against the very doors of the fortress. The shockwave made the floor tremble, consoles flickered in a frenzy of red alerts, and a rain of dust and small crystal fragments fell from the ceiling upon them. The roars of the Uozaru were no longer a terrifying echo in the distance. They were now guttural, deep, close vibrations resonating in their bones. The monsters were there, right outside, tearing down the last defenses of Kandor with systematic fury. "There's no time left," shouted Jor-El, his voice cutting through the air thick with dust and panic. His finger, trembling but resolute, flew over Kal-El's capsule control panel. "The launch systems are compromised. We have to do it now." Zor-El, with one last desperate look at his daughter through the crystal, did the same with Kara's ship. There was no ceremonial countdown, no final goodbye. Only the brutal urgency of survival. With a simultaneous gesture, both brothers activated the final sequence. A sharp hum, like a swarm of metallic insects, filled the launch chambers. The ships, propelled by energy defying Kryptonian gravity, rose from their supports. Kara felt an immense pressure in her chest, as if a giant hand were crushing her against her seat. For an instant, through her tear-streaked window, she saw her parents' figures fade, reduced to mere smudges in the dimness, and then they were replaced by the fleeting image of the chamber ceiling opening onto Krypton's sick sky. The two capsules, like two silver seeds amidst the storm of fire, shot into space. The ascent was violent and chaotic. Kara, stunned by the G-force and the pain, could barely process what she was seeing. But then, the ship leveled briefly, and her window offered her a panoramic view of the horror. Krypton, her world, the glorious crimson planet, was no longer the place of orderly beauty she remembered. From this perspective, it was an inferno. Vast continents were cracked by lines of fire, and the once clean atmospheres were poisoned by columns of black smoke rising from burning cities. And most surreal, silhouetted against the dying globe, were the monstrous shapes of the Oozaru, colossal beasts that, even from orbit, seemed to be tearing apart the planet's crust with their claws and energy blasts. It was an image from a nightmare, a biblical and total destruction that her adolescent mind struggled to comprehend. It was then that it happened. One of the giant apes, perhaps the very one that had torn down the defenses of Jor-El's house, lifted its bestial head towards the sky. Its eyes, like red beacons of hatred, locked onto the two tiny points of light trying to escape. With a roar that Kara swore she could hear through the void in the hull of her ship, the Oozaru opened its maw and unleashed a torrent of pure energy, a pinkish, destructive beam, aimed with surprising precision at the capsules. Kal-El's ship, smaller and more agile, managed to dodge the brunt of the attack, merely grazed by the edge of the blast. But Kara's ship, which was trailing slightly behind, took a direct hit on its flank. The sound was thunderous, a shriek of tearing metal. The cabin lights flickered maniacally, and a shower of sparks erupted from a control panel to her right. The entire capsule shuddered and spun violently, throwing her against her harnesses. Alarms began to blare, a strident chorus of critical failures. Panic, cold and sharp, seized Kara. The piloting lessons, the manuals she had read, everything vanished from her mind, replaced by primal terror. She looked through her window, desperate, and saw her cousin's ship, comparatively unharmed, continuing its flawless trajectory, venturing into the blackness of space, growing smaller and smaller, a point of hope receding from her. "No!" she screamed, pounding the crystal with her fist, but her voice was lost in the din of the alarms. Meanwhile, Kal-El's ship, following its perfect programming, activated its warp drives. With a flash of bluish light, it vanished into hyperspace, bound for its destination, Earth. Kara's ship, however, reeling and damaged, tried to follow. The automatic systems struggled to compensate for the damage to the propulsion system and navigation matrix. The Oozaru's energy blast hadn't been enough to destroy it, but it was enough to cause a catastrophic and subtle failure. A fissure in the jump drive's temporal regulator, an error in the route calculation due to a shattered navigation sensor. The capsule, faithful to its last command, also activated its jump unit. But the journey wasn't clean. It wasn't the deep, controlled cryogenic sleep that was planned. For Kara, it was a violent jolt followed by a sensation of tearing, as if space-time itself was stretching unnaturally around her. Her last conscious image wasn't of her planet being destroyed, but of Kal-El's ship's light trail vanishing, leaving her utterly alone in the darkness. Unbeknownst to her, the defect caused her ship not to follow the same temporal line. Her journey, meant to last a few years, would become an odyssey of decades. While her cousin, Clark Kent, grew up under Earth's yellow sun, learning to be a man, Kara would remain suspended in an erratic cryogenic limbo, a sleeper adrift in the vast cosmic ocean. Her arrival at the same destination delayed by the cruel whim of a blast fired by a beast on a doomed world. Baby Clark would arrive first, alone, becoming the legend. Kara, the older sister, the designated protector, would arrive late, finding a world that already had its own hero, and a cousin who didn't need her as she had promised he would. The Saiyan patrol ship, a standard Kershaw-class model, cruised through the interstellar void with a monotonous hum that vibrated in the bones. It was larger than the scout ships, a spherical capsule with short, sturdy wings, designed for durability, not elegance. Inside, the air smelled of overheated engine oil, polished metal, and the dry musk of the combat ration Toma was devouring. Toma, taller and of broad build, was reclining in his pilot's seat, taking distracted bites from a fruit with rough, purple skin. Juice ran down his chin, but he didn't flinch. His battle armor, like his comrades, bore the scars of 14 more years of brutal campaigns for Frieza's empire. On the other side of the cabin, Bardock remained standing, arms firmly crossed over his chest plate. He wasn't asleep. His eyes were closed, but his eyelids twitched slightly, and his fingers pressed into his biceps with a force that whitened his knuckles. He wasn't meditating peacefully. His mind was a battlefield of sharp instincts and bloody memories. "Hey, Bardock," Toma broke the silence, his mouth half full, tossing aside the fruit core. "A doubt gnaws at me. Why do you think Frieza would summon all us Saiyans back to Vegeta? It's not a mission. It's a gathering. And that tyrant doesn't like family reunions. Seems really strange to me." Bardock didn't open his eyes immediately. He let the question resonate in the charged air, mingling with the engine hum. When he finally spoke, his voice was a rough murmur, like gravel shifting in his throat. "I don't know," he admitted, but his tone wasn't one of ignorance, but of deep suspicion. "But I don't like it. A general summons, a top priority call for every warrior, regardless of their mission, to abandon their post and return to the home planet. There have only been 2 occasions in recent history." Toma frowned, trying to remember. "The first was when King Cold formally ceded the throne to Frieza, right? They made us all line up to swear loyalty to that brat," he said with disdain. "And the second," Bardock continued, finally opening his eyes. His gaze didn't settle on Toma, but on the infinite blackness of space visible through the viewport, was when the new scouter technology and these armors were implemented. "They gathered us for the mass re-equipment." Toma perked up a little, a flash of belligerent interest in his eyes. "That's it. That must be it. From what I heard, Frieza's engineers finally finished decoding the last Kryptonian databanks we plundered. Maybe they've finally adapted that technology into new weapons, or more powerful scouter. Maybe even new ships." An ugly grimace, a gesture of instinctive contempt, twisted Bardock's face. "And you think Frieza, in his infinite generosity, would give us the scraps of a world we destroyed for him, just to make us stronger?" he asked, his voice laden with bitter cynicism. Toma shrugged, but his confidence cracked. "Well, we are his main army. A stronger army conquers faster." "That's the problem, Toma," Bardock cut in, turning slowly to face his comrade. His expression was grim. "Since Krypton 14 years ago, something changed." Frieza's gaze. "His lackeys. It's different. They look at us with more contempt than ever. To him, we're just useful monkeys. And monkeys, when they breed too much and get too strong, stop being useful and become a plague." Toma stopped chewing. The piece of fruit suddenly felt heavy in his stomach. "Are you suggesting that Frieza might eliminate us?" The question came out in a whisper, almost heretical. "That's insane. We represent easily 60% of his military power. Without us, his empire crumbles. The other races don't have our battle lust. And would that stop him?" Bardock retorted dryly. "Fear is a more powerful weapon than 1,000 armies. And Frieza is afraid. He always has been. Afraid of a legend, a prophecy. He paused as if unwilling to speak the words. And no, the Saiyans and Frieza have never had a good relationship. He's a tyrant and we're his slaves with tails. Everyone, from the lowest infant to King Vegeta, dreams of seeing his head on a pike. And he knows it. Only the power gap between us has kept him from crushing us before. Toma fell silent, the fruit forgotten in his hand. Bardock's logic, forged in 1,000 battles and wild intuition, was hard to refute. That would be a massacre, he murmured, the reality of the danger colliding with his warrior pride. Bardock let out a grunt, a sound more of frustration than agreement. It doesn't matter anymore. The orbits are set. We'll reach Vegeta in a couple of days. He turned away again, fixing his gaze on the stars, as if he could see the answer written in Frieza's constellation. Until then, save your energy. Rest. Eat. He shot a sidelong glance at Toma. But keep one eye open. And the scouter active. Toma nodded slowly, his carefree attitude gone. He took the fruit and tossed it into a waste compartment, without appetite. The silence that filled the cabin was no longer just that of travel. It was heavy, laden with a foreboding omen. Bardock closed his eyes again, but this time he wasn't meditating. His mind raced. Asterisk. Gathering the whole pack in one place. That's a hunter's move, not a commander's. Frieza doesn't need us there to give us gifts. He needs us there to make sure no one escapes. This bad feeling. It's not paranoia. It's the instinct of an animal smelling the trap closing in. Asterisk. The hum of the ship now sounded like the beat of a funeral drum, carrying them straight into the heart of a celebration that, in the deepest part of his being, Bardock knew would be their last dance. Days had passed, a silent and oppressive countdown inside the ship's cabin. When planet Vegeta finally emerged in the viewport, it did so not with the promise of home, but with the ominous stillness of a tomb being prepared. The desert sphere, with its ochre and reddish tones, spun in a silence that seemed unnatural. There was no usual patrol ship traffic, no training signals on the surface. Only a heavy calm, charged with expectation. Bardock and Toma's ship was guided towards one of the capital's main landing docks. The reception wasn't warm but functional. The Saiyan technicians, in their fitted jumpsuits and scouters hanging around their necks, moved the ships with robotic efficiency, forming perfect rows of capsules reflecting the reddish sunlight. Everywhere, Saiyan warriors descended from their ships. They greeted each other with grunts and shoulder bumps, but even in their brusque salutations there was a palpable tension, a question hanging in the dusty air. Some arrived with trophies from their recent conquests, showing them off proudly, but their laughs sounded forced, too shrill in that expectant silence. Bardock descended the ramp, his equipment bag slung dismissively over his shoulder. His eyes, sharp as a hawk's, scrutinized the place. He didn't see a homecoming, he saw a pen. Toma followed closely, his usual carefree attitude replaced by cautious alertness. As they made their way through the crowd of regrouping warriors, a familiar but unexpected voice called out to him. "Hey, Bardock! By the great ape, I'm surprised to see you here so fast." A scion of slighter build, wearing the gray uniform of a hangar technician stained with grease and his brow marked by a scar crossing his eyebrow, approached. It was Verde, an old training partner who had preferred engineering to frontline combat. Bardock stopped, his expression not softening. A technician wasn't a high-ranking source, but they often heard things warriors overlooked. "Verde," Bardock nodded with a tone that invited further talk, not friendly chatter. "Yeah, I guess it's for Frieza's big meeting," Verde continued, unconsciously lowering his voice. "Though between you and me this whole thing feels weird. The atmosphere is tense. And it's not just that." He leaned in a little closer, his eyes revealing a flicker of concern. "I've heard rumors, things passing through the high-level communication channels. Frieza, or his scientists, have been asking questions. Very specific questions. Bardock's instinct, already running red-hot, tensed like a steel cable. Questions. He repeated, his voice a dangerous, low whisper. What do you mean, exactly? Verde looked around before speaking, making sure no one was within earshot. Questions about our historical archives. About the legend. The one about the Super Saiyan. The words fell like lead blocks in the silence between them. Bardock's heart lurched violently against his ribcage. The Super Saiyan. A myth. The fable Saiyan children heard alongside stories of conquests. The golden warrior of infinite power capable of challenging the gods. And Frieza, the most powerful tyrant in the galaxy, was asking about it. Not out of academic curiosity. No wonder, Bardock thought, and the world around him seemed to gain a sharp, merciless focus. Asterisk, it's not paranoia. It's a purge. He doesn't just fear us. He's terrified that the legend might be true. He's not gathering his army. He's gathering all the possible seeds of his own destruction in one place to extinguish them. Asterisk. His face, already harsh, transformed into a mask of stone. Without a word, without a gesture of thanks or farewell to Verde, Bardock spun on his heel. His gaze briefly met Toma's, and in that exchange, everything unsaid became clear. The premonition was a certainty. The trap was sealed. Toma, watching Bardock's back move away with a funeral determination, felt a chill run down his spine. He opened his mouth to say something, to ask, to deny what they both knew. But the words died on his lips. There was nothing to say. Only the heavy silence of an entire planet that, unknowingly, held its breath awaiting its executioner. Bardock walked into the crowd, not as a warrior returning home, but as a specter walking among the damned. The journey from the bustling hangars to the residential district was a trip through two parallel realities. On one side, the raw, boisterous energy of thousands of gathered Saiyans, a brute force resonating in the air like the hum of a giant swarm. Harsh laughter, the clashing of armor, bets on who had destroyed the toughest planet. On the other, the silent shadow Bardock carried with him, a cloak of foreboding that isolated him from the false jubilation. Every greeting he received, every gesture of camaraderie, seemed to him like the movement of a condemned man on death row, celebrating his last meal. His home wasn't a structure challenging the sky, but a refuge clinging to the earth. Dug into the base of a ferrous rock cliff, the entrance was framed by the curved, fossilized ribs of a great sandworm, a trophy from one of his first hunts with Gine. Crossing that threshold was like entering a bubble of a different reality. The air, heavy with Vegeta's reddish dust and the metallic smell of welding, transformed here. It smelled of slow-roasted hornbeast meat over volcanic stones, baked roots, and above all, the subtle, earthy perfume that was uniquely Gine's, a scent of clean roots and deep cave air that for Bardock meant peace. He dropped his equipment bag with a dull thud against the rocky wall, a familiar sound that was the final chord of any return. "I'm home," he announced, and for a brief, precious instant, the warrior's mask cracked. His voice, normally rough as sandpaper, took on a rough but genuine warmth, a spark of the light that only this place could ignite in him. As if his presence had disturbed a silent harmony, Gine emerged from the inner chamber. She was not a warrior. Her strength didn't reside in muscles chiseled for combat, but in the serene firmness of her back, in the gentle determination sculpting the corners of her brown eyes, and in the smile that, despite everything, always seemed about to bloom. Her short, dark hair, cut practically but softly framing her face, was the antithesis of warriors' aggressive crests. She rushed towards him, and Bardock enveloped her, burying his face in the hollow of her neck. Here, the smell of superheated plasma and alien blood from his armor mixed with and was vanquished by her essence. It was an embrace that was both an anchor and a refuge. "I'm so glad you made it in time," Gine whispered, her voice a balm against the cold certainty gnawing at Bardock's insides. "It seems like... well, I don't know if happy is the right word. it's more like a nervous commotion. But it's the first time in so many cycles the planet has been this full. It almost seems like the prelude to a big party, don't you think? Bardock didn't respond. He only tightened the embrace with a strength bordering on desperation, knowing the party was actually the banquet of the damned, the eerie calm before the hurricane of annihilation. And Kakarot? He finally asked, pulling back just enough so his voice, now notably softer, wouldn't be lost against her skin. He's in his incubator, Gine replied, and a genuine smile, free from the shadow he carried, lit up her face. She took his calloused hand in hers, which, though worked, were incredibly soft to the touch. Come, I'll show you. He's changed even since you left. She guided him deeper into the cave home, towards a side chamber illuminated by the amber soft light of a liquid crystal lamp. The heart of the home. And in the center, like an altar to the future, stood the Saiyan development capsule. It wasn't a luxury device, but a functional cylinder of burnished metal and reinforced glass, half filled with a dense, gently bubbling amber nutrient liquid. Inside, floating in placid weightlessness, was his son, Kakarot, a small child with jet-black tufts of hair already spiking with a will of their own, promising the same indomitable rebelliousness as his father. A perfectly formed little tail coiled and uncoiled with lazy movements in the fluid. His tiny fists, clenched with the instinctive strength of their race, moved as if dreaming of future battles, but his face was in absolute peace, untouched by the knowledge of hatred or fear. Gine leaned against the cool glass, her own reflection, an image of love and concern, superimposed over that of her sleeping son. "Look, Bardock," she whispered, her voice laden with a love so pure and heartbreaking it constricted Bardock's chest. "Do you see? Every day that passes, the scanner registers higher power levels. He's growing strong and healthy. Soon he'll be ready for his first combat evaluation. He's our little warrior." Bardock watched his son. He didn't see the warrior Frieza's empire craved, another tool in its conquest machine. He saw his son. He saw the promise of a tomorrow, the future of his lineage beating behind the glass. And that vision, so fragile and precious, solidified the terrible, irrevocable decision that had been brewing in his mind since his conversation with Verde. "Gine," he began, his voice suddenly losing all warmth, becoming grave, flat, like the edge of a sword before the thrust. "Listen to me, and don't interrupt. Tonight, when the artificial moon is at its lowest point and the guard is changing, I'm going to infiltrate the Gamma Reserve hangar. I'm going to steal an Arrow-class scout ship. It's small, has long-range life support, and its energy signature is nearly undetectable." The silence that fell over the chamber was so dense it seemed to absorb even the sound of bubbles from the nutrient liquid. Gine slowly pulled away from the glass, as if moving underwater. She turned to look at him, and in her eyes, happiness shattered like crystal, revealing disbelief and a primal fear that began to well up icy cold in her gaze. "Bardock," she stammered, her voice a trembling thread. Why are you saying these things? Has the journey affected you? Space fever. You're talking about stealing an Imperial ship. That's our death sentence. And it's for him." She pointed a trembling finger at the capsule. "He's our son. He's a baby, Bardock. He hasn't even spoken his first word. He can't go into space alone." "No." Bardock closed the distance in 2 long strides, taking her by the shoulders with a firmness that wasn't brutal, but desperate. His fingers clung to her as if to a last lifeline in a stormy sea. His gaze was a vortex of intensity, begging to be believed. "Gine, please. By the love that binds us, believe in me. Believe in this instinct that has saved my life in 100 battles. I don't think we have much time." The capabilities Kakarot has shown on the development scanner. They're above the 95th percentile. It's highly likely that, if things follow their normal course, they'll assign him to a class of planet, a world full of predators and warlike races. Or that, if things go wrong as I suspect, There won't be any planet left for him to go to. By sending him ourselves now we can choose. We can make sure he goes to a remote world with a low combat index, a place where he can be safe. Where he can live, Gine. Not just survive to fight. Gine stared at him fixedly, searching the depths of his eyes for a trace of the madness his words proclaimed, but she found only a lucid and terrifying certainty. The fear in her eyes began to be displaced by a deeper panic, that of a mother glimpsing the shadow of a threat she couldn't fully comprehend. What do you mean we don't have much time? She asked, her voice no more than a hoarse whisper, the sound sand makes before being swallowed by a whale. Bardock took a deep breath, a harsh sound that filled the silence. He knew the following words would seal his and his son's fate, would mark the end of innocence in this home. Frieza, he said, and the name fell between them like a block of ice, frigid and deadly. The great and powerful Frieza has been asking questions. Very specific questions to the royal archivists and his own scientists. Not about tactics nor about new worlds. Questions about... He paused, almost spitting the words. About the legend. The one about the Super Saiyan. Gine paled visibly. Color fled from her cheeks, leaving them the shade of ash. The Super Saiyan, she repeated as if the words burned her tongue. But that's just a myth, Bardock. A fable, a story to hype up recruits around the fire. Not even the council elders believe it. Exactly. Bardock cut in, and a bitter, cynical smile, devoid of all humor, formed on his lips. It's a goddamn children's tale. But I seriously doubt, with all my soul I doubt it, that twisted scoundrel gives a damn about the truth. That fear, that visceral panic he feels at the mere possibility. I've seen it shine in his reptile eyes. He's a tyrant who pisses himself in fear of a ghost. And a frightened tyrant, Gine, doesn't gather his entire problematic army, the whole race he despises and fears, on one planet, to give them medals and cake. Well, he does it to make sure no one escapes, that not a single corner remains to hide, when he decides to pull the trigger and wipe the board clean once and for all. The truth, cold, brutal, logical, and inescapable, crashed down on Gine with the weight of an asteroid. It wasn't the paranoia of a weary warrior. It was the cold logic of a predator recognizing the perfect trap. Her resistance broke. The fear in her eyes was replaced by a painful, lucid understanding, and then by the same iron determination burning in the depths of Bardock's eyes. It was the instinct of a mother wolf, more ancient and powerful than any loyalty to the Empire. She looked towards the capsule, towards her son floating innocently in his sleep, unaware that his destiny was being forged on the anvil of fear and the deepest love. To what planet? She managed to ask, her voice hoarse, torn by tears she refused to shed because strength was now more important than pain. Bardock followed her gaze, and for the first time since he had entered, his expression softened as he contemplated his son. A distant one, he replied, his voice regaining a trace of that rough warmth. Weak, invisible to Frieza's radars. A Class F planet, with primitive technology and a dominant race that, according to reports, lacks significant combat power. A world called Earth. There our son will have a chance. There the last Saiyan, far from Frieza's shadow, can forge his own destiny. Or at least, he can live to see another day's sun. The night on Vegeta was deep, tinged dark red by the light of distant stars filtering through the dusty atmosphere. There was no moon to light Bardock's path, only his feline instinct and an intimate knowledge of every shadow and every patrol. Moving like a specter among the metallic structures of the secondary hangar, he avoided the scouter beams and the heavy footsteps of the guards. The theft wasn't an act of brute force, but of surgical precision. He disabled the alarms with a short-range interference device he had acquired on a previous campaign and silenced the engines of the small Arasio-class scout ship with the skill of someone who knew every nut and bolt of those machines. When the ship glided out of the hangar, it was just another silhouette in the night, a secret the planet kept to itself. Gine waited for him at the designated point, a meeting place outside the city, far from prying eyes. They didn't use their scouters. At that moment, any signal was a risk. Communication between them was through looks, small gestures. Gine trembled, her hands clenched into fists at the sides of her simple dress. "Bardock, this is insanity," she whispered, her voice broken by fear. "What if you're wrong? What if all this is just paranoia and we're sending our son to death, to loneliness, for nothing?" Bardock turned to her. His face wasn't that of a ruthless warrior, but of a man carrying the weight of a world. "Gine," he said, his voice was deep, but surprisingly serene, a rock in the midst of her inner storm. "If I'm wrong, then Kakarot will have a boring mission on a peaceful planet. But if I'm right and I let my guard down..." He paused, and in his eyes she saw the reflection of a future in flames. "I will go for him immediately. I promise you." Gine looked at him, and through the fear, a tremulous smile, full of an agonizing love, formed on her lips. "No Saiyan man, no warrior I know, would care this much for his son." They were words laden with a truth that transcended their violent culture. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, but heavy, filled with everything that couldn't be said. Bardock broke the spell, his voice lower than ever. "I've always focused on the battlefield. I've always destroyed everything I was ordered to. I've blindly followed my Saiyan instincts, ravaging worlds, entire races, without asking, without feeling." He looked at his own hands, as if for the first time seeing the blood that invisibly covered them. "But now I just want to keep something alive. I want at least one piece of me, one piece of us to continue. That not everything we leave behind is ash and broken bones. I mean our son, Gine. Kakarot." Gine, hearing that raw confession, that side of Bardock no one else would ever see, felt her heart break and strengthen at the same time. She took his hand, joining her strength to his. They walked in silence, carrying the future between them, to a deserted plateau, far from any sign of life. The red sand crunched beneath their feet. There, with a tenderness that belied his strength, Bardock placed the small capsule where Kakarot, awake now, looked around with large, confused eyes. The child, sensing the stillness and tension, began to fuss, a low, bewildered cry that pierced their souls. Gine approached, falling to her knees before the capsule's crystal. She pressed her palms against the cold surface, as if she could penetrate the metal and glass to caress her baby one last time. "I programmed it for a place called Earth," Bardock explained, his voice a murmur beside her. "It's a world with outdated technology and people quite weak. Even a Saiyan infant like Kakarot could survive there. He'll grow strong." Gine, with a voice that cut like a knife, but filled with a fierce maternal promise, spoke directly to her son. "Listen to me, baby. Listen well. If your father is wrong, if all this is a mistake, we'll come for you. Promise you. We won't leave you alone." It was a white lie, an impossible hope she needed to say, that Kakarot needed to hear, even if only for an instant. Bardock knelt beside her. His large hand, calloused and marked by war, rested next to Gine's on the crystal. His gaze met his son's, who watched them through tears. "Listen, Kakarot," he said, and his voice held a calm authority, a final certainty. "You have to be strong. You have to survive no matter what. Survive." He paused, and the following words came out with superhuman effort, a feeling he had never uttered before. "Be very lucky. And take care of yourself, son. I love you." As he spoke those words, a button on his wrist device emitted a dull beep. The capsule's engines came to life with a low hum. Kakarot, frightened by the noise, cried out, his tiny fist pounding the glass from within. "No!" Gine wailed, clinging to the ship as if her weight could stop the inevitable. The capsule rose, first slowly, then with increasing speed. It ascended like a lonely star fleeing the red planet. Gine followed it with her gaze, her body trembling, until it was nothing more than a distant point of light. And then, the floodgate of her emotions burst. A heart-wrenching scream, laden with all the pain in the universe, surged from the depths of her being. Kakarot. Her son's name echoed across the empty desert, a lament lost in the wind. Her legs gave way, and she fell to her knees on the sand, sobs shaking her body. Bardock didn't stop her. He didn't say a word. He slowly approached and placed a firm hand on her shoulder, an anchor in her sea of pain. He remained standing motionless, his gaze lost in the blackness of space where the ship had disappeared, carrying the silence, the guilt, and the faint hope that somewhere called Earth, his son could have the life they never would. Frieza's throne wasn't simply a seat. It was a symbol of absolute dominion, carved from a black organic material that seemed to absorb light, inlaid with crystals that pulsed with sinister energy. From his elevated position, Frieza observed planet Vegeta, spinning below him like a rotten, bloody fruit. His reptilian eyes, with their vertical, merciless pupils, scanned the desert surface with a mixture of deep boredom and visceral contempt. "Truly pathetic," he murmured to himself, his voice a silky whisper that cut through the command chamber silence. An entire planet of belligerent monkeys, believing themselves masters of their own destiny, without understanding they are merely pawns in a game whose rules I write. They scurry, they breed, they fight. Like insects in a jar. Suddenly, a minuscule, irregular flash on the edge of the planet caught his attention. It wasn't the orderly movement of a patrol, nor the clean trail of a transport. It was chaotic, violent, a point of wild energy forcing its way through space, leaving in its wake a trail of debris that had once been his surveillance ships. A faint, almost imperceptible interest lit up Frieza's cold gaze. It was the same curiosity an entomologist might feel upon finding an ant that, instead of fleeing, raised its mandibles towards him. Before his mind could order an analysis, the voices of his most loyal henchmen resonated in the chamber, disturbing the deathly stillness. "My Lord Frieza," Zarbon announced, with his melodious, affected tone, making a perfect bow. "Our long-range sensors detect a significant anomaly. It appears to be a single Saiyan. He is decimating our blockade perimeter. His energy pattern is erratic, frenzied, and his trajectory is directly towards us." Dodoria let out a guttural laugh, a sound like rocks tumbling against his enormous belly. "The insect's got a pair of balls, Lord Frieza. He's turning our soldiers into paste like they were flies. He must be completely insane." Frieza didn't flinch. He didn't alter his relaxed posture. Simply one long, pale, deadly finger languidly rose to point at the approaching point of conflict. An unhealthy interest, that of a capricious god about to toy with his food, gleamed in his eyes. "Let him approach," he ordered, his voice a thread of ice that froze the air. "Let the monkey believe for a moment that his fury matters. It will be brief entertainment, an appetizer before the main course. After all, what better way to begin a purge than with a fireworks display made from the desperation of one of their best warriors?" Bardock was no longer a man. He was a living projectile, a meteor of rage and pain propelled by the last breath of his race. His small ship, damaged in his initial escape, had been abandoned, turned into another piece of floating scrap in the cemetery surrounding Vegeta. Now he flew with his own key, a fierce bluish trail slicing through the black void. His destination was singular, obsessive. Frieza's gigantic, obscene command ship, hanging in orbit like a metal vulture. Around him, space boiled with enemy activity. Dozens of Frieza's Class A combat ships crowded against him, their cannons firing green plasma bursts that wove a deadly net. Elite commandos, with heavier armor and scouters flashing with critical threat data, launched in squadrons, trying to contain him, to crush him. But Bardock had transcended fear, fatigue, even reason. He was the incarnation of Saiyan vengeance. Every cell in his body screamed with fury. His fists, wrapped in a crackling aura, pierced the hulls of ships as if they were glass, causing them to burst into silent flowers of fire and shrapnel. His energy blasts, no longer simple attacks but extensions of his hatred, swept away the soldiers who stood in his way, reducing them to cosmic dust. It wasn't a tactical battle. It was a reaping, a volcanic eruption of pure power. And with every enemy destroyed, with every piece of Frieza's armada he turned to rubble, a single name was a war cry, a challenge resonating through open communications, a message aimed directly at the tyrant's ear. Frieza! He roared, and the sound, amplified by his ki, propagated through the void, a tangible vibration of pure hatred. Frieza! Come out of your luxury cage and face me. Frieza! Finally, breaking through the last and densest line of defense, the colossal silhouette of Frieza's command ship filled his entire field of vision. It was a mountain of malevolent metal, a reminder of the tyranny that had enslaved his people. And then, as if the universe itself obeyed his call, the enormous main hatch opened with an ominous silence. There, floating with an elegance that was obscene amidst the chaos, surrounded by an aura of power so dense it distorted the light around him, was Frieza. His posture was nonchalant, his arms crossed, and his gaze held a bored amusement, as if watching a mediocre play whose actors were trying too hard. Bardock, panting, his armor shattered and smoking, with deep cuts on his arms and face, stopped before him. The distance between them was abysmal, not just in meters but in power. Yet, on Bardock's face, there was no trace of fear, only a defiant smile, wild and full of a bitter, triumphant understanding. Finally, Frieza! He spat the words, each one laden with the weight of 1,000 conquered worlds and a betrayed planet. Finally you show your face, you damned coward. This will be a day etched into the annals of the cosmos. The day a simple monkey changed his destiny. The destiny of the entire planet Vegeta, of my people, of my king. His voice broke for an instant, and in his eyes shone the image of Gine, of Kakarot. And the destiny of my son, Kakarot. With a scream that defied the very laws of reality, Bardock gathered every last drop of his power. Not just the ki from his muscles, but the energy of his memories, the love for his family, the pride of his race, the rage at his powerlessness. In his palms, a sphere of energy began to form. It wasn't blue nor white. It was a vortex of electric purple and blinding silver, which grew until it became massive, dense, unstable, crackling with bolts of pure energy. It was the collective last breath of the Saiyans, the soul of an entire planet concentrated into one single, desperate attack. Sweat evaporated from his brow, the blood vessels in his arms burst under the strain. And above all, he bellowed, the tendons in his neck taut like steel cables, his voice hoarse from the superhuman effort. I will change your damned destiny, Frieza. Die with us. And he launched the gigantic energy sphere. The attack, a shooting star of vengeance and sacrifice, headed directly towards Frieza with a shriek that tore through the very silence of space, a light so intense that for a moment it eclipsed the stars. Frieza didn't flinch. He didn't adopt a combat stance. He showed not the slightest interest. With the same expression of annoyance with which one might shoo away a fly, he raised the index finger of his right hand. At its tip, a small sphere of energy began to form. It wasn't large or impressive. It was the size of a marble, a deep reddish-orange, like a drop of lava pulled directly from the core of a dying sun. In it, there was no fury, no desperation, only a concentration of power so absolute that space around it curved and trembled. What a pathetic light show, Frieza murmured, and a sadistic, languid, supremely arrogant smile formed on his lips. Insects always think their buzzing is thunder. With a nonchalant, almost lazy motion, he launched the small sphere. He didn't care that several of his own soldiers and a transport ship were in its direct path. They were vaporized instantly, without a scream, without an explosion. They simply ceased to exist. The orange sphere, undeterred, met Bardock's gigantic energy sphere, a colossus of purple light against a mote of fire. And it annihilated it. There was no epic collision, no struggle of forces. Frieza's sphere simply pierced through Bardock's attack like a blowtorch through snow. The gigantic energy sphere disintegrated, vanishing in a flicker of harmless particles, without resistance, without drama, without slowing in the slightest. The orange sphere continued its unstoppable path and struck Bardock's chest. The explosion was silent in the void. But for Bardock, the entire universe erupted into indescribable white agony. He felt every molecule of his body separate. His bones turn to dust. His armor fuse with his skin. It was a pain that transcended the physical. It was the dissolution of his very being. But on the very threshold of annihilation, in that last microsecond of consciousness where time stretched like taffy, his eyes, beyond the unbearable pain, captured something. It wasn't a thought, it was a vision, a flash of the future torn from the flow of time by the intensity of his death. He saw a rocky, destroyed planet under a sickly sky. And there, standing tall with his back straight, was a young man. He wore an orange GI, his black hair spiky like his own. But then, it erupted into a golden electric flame that illuminated the entire cosmos with its glory. He saw that young man, his son Kakarot, his fierce blue eyes facing Frieza. He saw his fists, charged with a strength he could only dream of, striking the tyrant, making him bleed, making him retreat. He saw surprise, then fear in Frieza's eyes. It was a possibility, future, legacy. It wasn't a guaranteed victory, but it was hope. It was the seed that he, Bardock, had planted by sending his son away. And in that instant, with his lips charred, with his body disintegrating into nothingness, Bardock managed to sketch one last triumphant smile. A gesture of pure and absolute victory against the darkness. He whispered with his last breath, a name that was at once a prophecy, a blessing, and a war cry for the ages to come. Kakarot. Frieza's sphere, having served its purpose with Bardock, did not stop. It continued its unstoppable path towards planet Vegeta. It struck the surface with the force of an enraged god. A light, brighter than 1,000 suns, engulfed the planet, followed by a silent and total expansion of destructive energy. The planetary crust cracked, the mantle exploded outward, the core collapsed. Where once there was a world, a home, a culture, a proud race of warriors, only remained a cluster of incandescent asteroids, molten debris, and an eternal, empty silence. Planet Vegeta, and with it almost the entire Saiyan lineage, were erased from history in a single merciless act by a frightened tyrant. Light years away, cutting through the cold and silent blackness of interstellar space, the small capsule carrying Kakarot was a bubble of fragility. Inside, the Saiyan baby slept deeply, cradled by the soft, monotonous hum of the warp engines. His small chest rising and falling in a peaceful rhythm, unaware of the genocide that had just consumed his home world. But in the depths of his infant sleep, in the very substrate of his Saiyan soul, a distant voice, laden with fierce love, infinite pain, and unwavering faith, resonated like the echo of thunder from a world already dead. They weren't words he could understand, but a feeling, an imprint, a legacy encoded in his blood. Kakarot. My son. You who sleep while your world burns. Hear your father's last whisper. You are my last hope. The last spark of a fire they tried to extinguish. In you I place not only my blood, but all the pride of the Saiyans, their indomitable strength, their spirit that refuses to kneel. You are the vengeance of the fallen, the cry of defiance rising from the ashes. And above all, listen to me well, my son. Above all, finish Frieza. The ship continued its imperturbable journey, a seed of hope and destruction traveling across the cosmos, carrying the last free child of an enslaved and dead world, towards a blue and green destiny called Earth, where a new legacy, forged in love and loss, was about to begin. The immensity of interstellar space is a canvas of absolute silence, broken only by the faint glow of distant stars and the occasional beat of a pulsar. In this vast ocean of darkness, a small spherical capsule, a mote of metal and technology against the cosmic scale, sailed through the void. It was the last ark of a dead world, the mobile tomb of an entire race, and at the same time a cradle. Inside, sunk in the icy lethargy of cryo-sleep, little Kakarot floated in a deep, induced slumber. His memories, if any baby of his race could have them, were of blurred faces, of a warm female voice, and the firmness of calloused hands. Now, there was only silence and the constant vibration of the engines cradling him. There was no clock marking the years, months, or days. Time, outside the relativity of a planet, was an illusion. For Kakarot, eternity might have passed in a sigh, or an instant might have felt like an age. Finally, a soft, persistent beep, the heartbeat of the autopilot, intensified in the cabin. Advanced sensors, programmed with the last coordinates of a desperate destination, had located a compatible planetary signature: a nitrogen-oxygen-rich atmosphere, a stable G2V-type sun, and a lush biosphere. The target was locked. The planet designated T-3S-5-2, known locally as Earth. The capsule adjusted its trajectory with millimeter precision. The blue world's gravity began to pull at it, drawing the small Saiyan seed towards its new home. Re-entry into Earth's atmosphere wasn't a gentle descent, but a brutal and fiery fall. The friction with the increasingly dense air turned the outer hull into an incandescent forge. The metallic sphere transformed into a fireball, an artificial shooting star that tore through the nocturnal mantle of the Western Hemisphere. Its whistle, which began as a distant whisper, became a deafening shriek that ripped through the tranquil atmosphere of West City, a city sleeping peacefully, unaware of the destiny hurtling towards it. The trajectory, though guided, was inherently violent. The capsule, like a divine bullet, plunged towards the most luxurious and manicured grounds of the city. With a roar that was at once a dull impact and an explosion of earth and vegetation, it found its final resting place in the very heart of the private botanical gardens of Capsule Corporation. The crash shook the ground, rattling the windows of nearby structures and sending a flock of nocturnal birds into the sky in a flurry of wings and alarm calls. The peace of the night, until then broken only by the distant hum of air traffic, was shattered brutally and definitively. An instant after the collision, a complex security system, worthy of a top-secret military installation, activated fully. Enormous spotlights mounted on turrets emerged from the ground and rooftops, clicking on with a metallic clunk to sweep the gardens with blinding white light beams, turning night into day. Silent sirens, inaudible to the human ear but sending alert pulses directly to private security devices and the biometric wristbands of the Brief family, began to wail on a frequency of panic. Inside the majestic and futuristic main residence, the scene was one of domestic tranquility. In the main living room, a vast room decorated with a mix of elegant modern furniture and high-level technological junk, Dr. Brief, the mastermind behind the Capsule Corporation empire, was relaxed. He wore a rich blue silk house robe, stained here and there with traces of engine oil or solder, a testament to his carefree genius. His characteristic well-trimmed white mustache moved as he murmured to himself, reviewing some holographic blueprints of what seemed to be a new flying car model, floating in the air before him. Beside him, on an impeccably designed sofa, sat his wife, Mrs. Brief. She was a woman of sculpted and serene beauty, who seemed to have stopped time at its prime. Taller than her husband, she wore a long, simple emerald evening dress that accentuated her slender figure and her mane of perfectly styled golden curls, giving her an air of an old-school movie star enjoying her well-deserved retirement. On her lap, completely absorbed in disassembling a state-of-the-art robotic doll with a miniature screwdriver, was her younger daughter, Bulma Brief. At barely 5 years old, the girl was already a prodigy. Her hair, a vibrant indigo blue that almost seemed like neon, was cut in a perfect bob, framing a face full of freckles and bright blue eyes that distilled precocious intelligence and a curiosity that could be as adorable as it was dangerous. The crash and subsequent shake rattled the crystals of the glass chandelier. "By all that is invented!" exclaimed Dr. Brief, causing the holographic blueprints to flicker and fade. "An earthquake in West City? Impossible. Could it have been an explosion in the exotic materials lab? I told that assistant to be careful with the unstable gravitium sample." "Darling, be careful," said Mrs. Brief, her melodious voice now tinged with alarm. Instinctively, she wrapped Bulma in a protective hug, who, instead of being frightened, dropped the screwdriver and the doll, her eyes widening like saucers, not from fear, but from electrifying excitement. "Daddy! Mummy! Something fell from the sky!" shouted Bulma, pointing her small, grease-stained finger towards the glass wall overlooking the garden. It was huge and on fire, like a rocket, but it crashed. Dr. Brief, driven by a mix of genuine concern for his family and property, and a scientific curiosity that was the driving force of his life, adjusted his robe and grabbed the first thing he found. A heavy Victorian-era umbrella he used as decoration, as if it were a cane or a potential weapon. "Stay here," he ordered, though without much conviction, knowing his daughter was as stubborn as he was. "Don't you even dream of it, Brief," replied his wife, standing up with determination and picking up Bulma. "If it's an accident in the labs, you'll need help. And if it's something from space, I want to see it." The small family, a unit of determination mixed with curiosity, rushed out through the sliding glass doors onto the wide terrace. The cool night air, which previously smelled of jasmine and freshly cut grass, was now laden with the acrid metallic odor of hot metal and burnt earth. Directing their gaze towards the origin of the chaos, the spectacle they found left them absolutely speechless, paralyzed by a mix of horror and wonder. A crater about 3 meters in diameter, perfectly circular and smoking, had destroyed what until minutes ago was Mrs. Brief's prized genetically modified space orchid bed, her pride and joy. In the center of this horticultural disaster, half buried in the black earth and surrounded by charred petals, lay an object that defied all earthly logic. It was a perfect sphere of dark, burnished metal, marked with strange inscriptions that resembled no known language or code. It had no wings, no rudders, no visible windows. Only a circular hatch, now covered in soot and slightly dented from the impact. "Good heavens!" murmured Mrs. Brief, bringing a gloved hand to her mouth, her eyes wide. Is it what I think it is? It looks like a spaceship." "Wow!" was all Bulma could articulate, but her expression said much more. Her eyes scrutinized the object with the intensity of a senior engineer, completely forgetting the scare. "It's a descent capsule, but the design is totally inefficient for the atmosphere. The friction must have been brutal. And look at the damping system, it must be." Dr. Brief, having discarded the umbrella, approached with the caution of a man facing the unknown. His scientist's mind analyzed every detail. The metal alloy, the pattern of carbonization, the physics of the crater. Suddenly, with a sharp hiss of compressed air that made all three of them jump, the circular hatch opened inward with a smooth, precise movement, revealing an interior padded with a silvery gray material. Dim amber lights flickered erratically on an inner control panel, and cold vapor, the last breath of the cryogenic system, escaped, forming ghostly swirls in the warm night air. And then they saw it. In the center of the seat, anchored by harnesses made of a fibrous, resistant material, and wrapped in a soft thermal fabric of a weave that didn't exist on Earth, was a baby. A profound silence, laden with absolute disbelief, fell over the Brief family. They held their breath in unison. The baby was small, with plump, rosy cheeks promising health, and a tuft of jet black hair, so thick and rebellious it already spiked upward naturally, defying gravity even in his sleep. He seemed, in every aspect, a perfectly healthy and adorable human baby. Until Dr. Brief's gaze, sharpened by decades of scientific observation, landed on a detail that made him lean forward, adjusting his glasses on the tip of his nose with a nervous movement. "Panchi, dear," he whispered, his voice trembling with excitement. "Please tell me my eyes are playing tricks on me. Does that child have a tail?" Mrs. Brief Panchi stepped closer, squinting. "Goodness, yes," she exclaimed in a whisper. "A tail. A real, furry tail and everything." It was undeniable. A perfectly formed tail, covered in soft dark brown fur, moved lazily, coiling and uncoiling in the alien fabric wrapped around the child. It was a completely natural appendage, an integral part of his small body. Dr. Brief, overcoming the initial shock with the strength of his intellect and his inherent kindness, extended his hands that had built impossible machines, with a tenderness that moved his wife to tears. with the delicacy of someone handling the finest crystal. He unfastened the harnesses and lifted the small baby, holding him carefully. The child, upon being lifted, stopped moving his tail and instead blinked, his large black eyes, innocent and curious, opening wide. He looked at the white-mustached man holding him, and then a wide, contagious, and completely unwitting smile spread across his face. He let out a guttural, happy little laugh, a pure sound of life resonating in the charged silence of the night. Dr. Brief couldn't help but laugh too, a deep, warm, genuine laugh that came from his chest. "Well, well, well," he exclaimed, gently rocking the baby in his arms, which seemed made to hold him. "So you're a baby, huh? And it's more than clear you're not from around here. No, no, no. You're a little strange with this spiky hair that looks like a brush and, well, this rather peculiar additional appendage," he said, gently pointing at the tail with his fingertip, feeling the soft texture of the fur. "But by all inventions, you're quite smiley. And you have a light in your eyes." Little Kakarot, as if he perfectly understood the kind and jovial tone, stretched out his chubby little hand and tried to grab the doctor's prominent white mustache. "Ouch! This kid is a bit curious and bold," said Dr. Brief, letting his mustache be grabbed without the slightest complaint, enjoying the contact. "Wow, you sure have a strong grip for being so small. You show promise, little one, you show promise." Mrs. Brief approached, a maternal smile, wide and full of instant love, lighting up her face. Bulma, who had been set down on the ground, also came closer, looking at the baby with a mix of scientific fascination and a little girl's natural curiosity. "Dear," said Mrs. Brief, her voice soft as silk, "we can't. We simply can't leave him here. Look at him. He's just a baby, a little angel. He's alone and scared." "Of course not, Panchi," affirmed Dr. Brief with a conviction that sprang from the depths of his being. It would be the absolute height of rudeness, and above all deeply wrong and inhumane, to leave an infant alone in the garden, no matter what remote galaxy he came from. "And besides," he added with a wink, "he landed in my yard, on my property." A spark of pure joy and amusement shone in his eyes behind his glasses. "I suppose this counts as an express adoption, don't you think? A gift from the heavens, literally speaking. A cosmic customer." He looked at the baby, who was still playing with his mustache, completely fascinated. Although, from what I can see, he didn't come with a return label or an instruction manual, or even a note from his previous owners. Not even a name. He's a blank slate. Dr. Brief was thoughtful for a moment, observing the child with loving intensity. His gaze settled on the black hair, so rebellious, so full of life and energy, that it seemed to want to touch the stars. "Because of your hair," he murmured almost to himself. "Because of this vital energy, so wild and pure you radiate. As if you had all the momentum of a rocket." "I got it. I think I have the perfect name for you, little astronaut." He lifted the baby again to look him directly in the eyes, as if formalizing a contract with the universe. "From today, from this very moment, your name will be Goku." He pronounced the two syllables clearly with a joyful solemnity. "Go, like the force that brought you here, and Ku, like the sky you fell from." He paused dramatically, enjoying the historic moment. "And since you're going to be my son, you'll carry my last name with pride." Another pause, laden with emotion. "So from now on you will be Goku Brief." Hearing the new name, little Goku, as if his Saiyan soul recognized and approved the choice in this new world, let out a happy, crystalline, contagious laugh that rose towards the starry sky, clearing any trace of tension or fear. It was the laugh of a new beginning, the sound of a destiny forever intertwining with the threads of chance and kindness. It was the first step on the path of the Saiyan hero who, unknowingly, without remembering a world in flames or a father's prophecy, was destined to grow, to love, and to become the most powerful protector of this fragile and precious blue world called Earth. And he would do so, not as Kakarot, the warrior of a dead planet, but as Goku Brief, the son of a scientist and the brother of a genius, in the bosom of the most eccentric, brilliant, and loving family the cosmos could have provided him.